Okay, let's discuss the possibilities for installing an upgraded head unit in the Aygo Mark II, the Citroen C1 Mark II and the Peugeot 108. Now these cars were introduced in 2014, they went out of production in 2021. And essentially, whichever model you've got, you'll see one of three head units in there. The base models had a very simple radio with some push button controls, effectively single DIN. The higher spec models from 2014 to about the middle of 2018 had a touchscreen unit, a 2-button touchscreen unit. And then from 2018 to the end of production in 2021, they had one of these 3-button touchscreen units. Okay, so these are units made by Pioneer, and obviously it's a custom fit unit designed for the Aygo dash center console. Now the earlier units only have 2 buttons in, 2 buttons on this side, on the right hand side of the unit, and they don't have Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. So if you've got one of those units made between 2014 and about the middle of 2018, it'll have 2 buttons and it won't be able to connect to your phone using Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. They did have something called MirrorLink, which frankly with a modern phone is probably not much use. Of course they will connect with Bluetooth and you can make phone calls through them, because normally there's an installed microphone up by the interior light and you can hear the other party talking through the speakers. So that's the 2014 to 2018 situation. In 2018, along with quite a few other changes on the car, the various changes to the engine and the suspension, they introduced this 3-button unit. Okay, and the 3-button unit does have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. It's made by Pioneer. It runs a version of Linux, and it enables you to connect your phone, whether it be an Android phone or an Apple phone, to the radio via a wired connection. So there's a USB port underneath the heater controls in the center console, and you can connect to the head unit using that connection. And what that does is that enables you to use your phone and display on this screen things like Google Maps, Spotify, various other apps. Okay. Now what a lot of people do is they've got one of the earlier vehicles, a 2014 to mid 2018 vehicle, and obviously they want to upgrade. They want to use Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. So there is a huge demand for these later 3-button units. Okay, and I've seen these going for ridiculous prices, more than £400, which is absolutely crazy. And so unless you can get one of these very cheap, and by very cheap I would mean not more than about £250, I wouldn't bother trying to upgrade to one of these 3-button units. And I'll give you 3 reasons why that's the case. Reason number 1, I'm making this video at the end of 2024, so the newest unit you'll come across in the 3-button style is 3 years old, and the oldest unit will be 6 or 7 years old. So it's already quite an old unit, and do you want to pay several £100s for something which is already quite well worn? It's of quite an age. Secondly, they are not a fantastic unit to start with. The output power is quite modest. It's less than 10 watts per channel. The USB output tops out at about 500 milliamps, which is not great. The audio performance, the frequency response and so forth is not fantastic. Remember, these were going into a relatively inexpensive car, so they were not a particularly high spec unit. And after 3+ years, some of them are starting to show signs of wear and tear, so the touchscreen not working properly, or delaminating. And quite a common fault is the USB output to give problems and to not charge the phone. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3 is because of the high prices they fetch. Quite a lot of these are being stolen. So they're ripped out of cars, and very often the car ends up being a write-off because the dash is damaged when the unit's pulled out, and often the unit can be damaged in the process. So unless you can get one of these very cheap, I would discourage getting one and go down another route. Look at some other options. So I'm going to go through some of the options that you've got if you want to upgrade your head unit in the 2014 onward Aygo C1 and Peugeot 108. So let's look at some of those options. Right, so let's look at some of the options we've got if we want to replace the original factory head unit with an aftermarket device. The first thing I'm going to say is that if phone call quality is important to you, go for one of the big brand aftermarket head units, something like a Sony, a Kenwood, a Pioneer. Nearly all of the Chinese head units have poor telephone call quality on the outgoing call. In other words, when you speak, the person listening to you is going to struggle to understand what you're saying because they tend to have very little in the way of noise filtering or signal conditioning on the audio input. So if you're the kind of person who makes a lot of phone calls from your car, particularly when you're driving at higher speeds, anything from 50 miles an hour upwards, most of the Chinese head units are going to give pretty poor audio performance. There are various YouTube videos out there, people reviewing Chinese head units saying, well, this is fantastic, it's a game changer, it's amazing value. I don't see many of them mentioning that major disadvantage. The only Chinese supplier I'm aware of that really puts some effort into the audio call quality is a company called Aygo Auto, who do some of the in-car electronics for BYD, the BYD car company. They produce the Aygo 7, which does have signal condition and filtering, but it's not a cheap unit. It's a £300 plus aftermarket head unit. So good telephone call quality is going to cost you some money. And personally, I would, if you want an easy fit and forget solution with good call quality, I'd be looking at the likes of Kenwood and Pioneer. But assuming telephone call quality is not that critical to you, then there are various other options available, including some of the low-cost Chinese units. But anyway, let's first of all look at how we can do a simple replacement of the factory fit unit. So the factory fit head unit comes with this custom shaped front panel here, which obviously fits into the center console of the car. It's not detachable, it's part of the original Pioneer unit. Okay, so an obvious thing to do is to buy one of these adapter panels, these fascia adapters, which will take a standard aftermarket double DIN head unit. Double DIN is 180 millimeters by 100 millimeters. So make sure whatever head unit you buy has got a front panel 180 by 100 or slightly smaller. Sometimes they're sort of 96 by 178 or whatever. And we get, usually with the adapter panel, we get a little trim piece there to fill the gap if necessary. And the adapter panel, it has the same four retainers, the four locating pegs that the factory radio have, and it will come with a couple of metal brackets, and the metal brackets basically get sandwiched between this fascia plate and the rest of the dashboard, and we've got some slots in there to put screws through and hold the head unit. When you've got everything more or less lined up, there's a couple of holes there, and you can pop a self-tapping screw through into the plastic backing of the dashboard to help retain everything together. Now these are available on AliExpress. I think they're about 20 to 30 pounds delivered to the UK. So don't pay more than about that much. And what I've got here is a standard Sony doubled-in head unit. It's running Android, and basically you're using an adapter plate like this. You would mount the unit there, and then we've got a good solution. Now behind the fascia plate in the Aygo, there's limited room. You need to try and find a head unit, a doubled-in head unit, with a depth no more than about 80 millimeters, because there's plastic behind there. Now you can trim that plastic away, which is what some of the car audio people do when they're fitting a head unit with a greater depth. So if the depth is more than about 80 millimeters, then you're going to need to cut some plastic behind, which personally is not something I like to do. Now another option we've got is to use this fascia plate, and then we can get a different kind of head unit. So here we've got a head unit which is got a doubled-in chassis to it, but you can see it's got a sort of gimbal arrangement here, and it's got a 10.2 inch screen, and that screen can pivot and tilt, so we can mount the doubled-in chassis in the behind the fascia plate, and then we've got this 10.1 inch screen which we can angle slightly toward the driver. Okay, that's not a bad solution. This is the Eonon UA13 Plus. It's a relatively low spec unit. I think it's around about £120, but it's got quite a nice screen. I installed one recently in a Toyota GT86, and the driver was very happy with it. It has a limited amount of memory, and it's got a 4-core Rockchip processor, so it's not a powerful unit, but if you're running Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, you're essentially using the processing power of your phone. You're really only using the head unit to act as a dumb terminal to the phone. So using this, you can run Google Maps, you can run TuneIn, radio apps, Spotify, whatever else from your phone onto this screen, and you're not really too concerned about the processing power of the head unit, because your phone's doing all the work and providing the internet connection. So that's another option we've got. Now beyond that, we don't have to use this fascia plate and be restricted to a small screen. We can actually use a larger adapter panel. So let me show you how we can use a 9-inch or a 10.3 inch screen. So another alternative is to use a bigger screen. We could use a 9.5 or a 10.3 inch screen, which are standard sizes for the Chinese Android head units. So here I've got a 9.5 inch Android head unit, and it mounts into a standard holder with 4 screws, and then at the back it's actually mounted into one of these fascia plates. So we've got the fascia plate here, and we've got some screws which retain the head unit into this fascia plate. So what we have to do is take off the center console surround, remove the factory fit radio. I'm going to show you in another video how that's done. The fascia plate then mounts into the center console molding in the way that the original factory fit radio did, and then we secure in this case the 9.3 inch, using some little screws and plastic tabs. Okay, so this sits quite nicely in the front of the Aygo. It's 9.5 inch and quite a good option. Now the third option, if we want an even bigger screen, is we can actually get a complete center console molding. So here's the molding. This is where the heater controls are, the hazard switch, there's a little garnish plate fits in there, and here we've got space to mount one of the 10.3 inch Android head units. Okay, and that's retained by 4 screws at the back. And this is moulded with all the same locating pegs as the original center console. Now the moulding quality is not bad. They all seem to come out of the same factory. I've looked at a few. They have the same moulding marks on them and so forth. So I'm not convinced there's much difference between the various brands that are sold. You get these from AliExpress. I think this one was about £25. And all you need to do really is there's some little plastic spring clips that you need to take off the old console, and you just pop them onto these locating pegs. You fit your head unit in there using the 4 screws. You move across your hazard switch, and a little trim piece fits in there. They're each retained by 2 self tappers, and you've got yourself a 10.3 inch Android head unit. So it's quite a good solution. The moulding quality is not as good as the original factory moulding in the car, but it's not bad. It's quite acceptable. There's a nice glossy finish. There's some minor moulding marks down the side there, but it's not going to disgrace your car. Unless you know what you're looking for, it's going to look pretty much like factory fit. So that's the other option you have. So it depends what screen size you want and what kind of head unit you want. Now, one thing I will say is if you just want a nice, easy solution that fits and works, probably go with one of the big name Japanese brands, the Kenwoods, the Pioneers, the Sonys, because they give you good phone call quality, and basically they're free of bugs. Most of them run Linux. The Sony one I showed a little while ago runs Android, but a lot of them run Linux, and they're really just acting as kind of a dumb terminal for Android Auto or Apple CarPlay on your phone. The Chinese Android units are a slightly different kettle of fish. They are mostly effectively an Android tablet. So what you're doing when you get one of these is you're basically getting an Android tablet computer. A lot of them are what I would call a work in progress. In other words, if you don't mind tinkering around with files and lots of settings and options and updating things and so forth, then that's fine. If you're not really interested in messing around with Android and computers and IT, you just want something that works, then there might be a little bit of a headache for you. Most of the Chinese companies that sell these are not the original manufacturer. So, for example, this was sourced from a company called Mercadi, also known as Navifly. Same company, Mercadi and Navifly, the same company, but the actual main board in there is manufactured by a company called Fangyi Tong, better known as FYT. So in actual fact, there's literally a handful of companies make the main boards for these things, and then they sell them to the retailer, the company that retails them. And there are loads and loads of these companies retailing them. So we've got TIs, Mercadi, Navifly. There's one called Pumpkin. There's Doodoo Auto, Joying. There's a massive number. Okay, but behind most of them, you'll find either FYT or Topway, or possibly another company called MTC. There's just a few companies actually make the main boards. I would advise going for an FYT unit. They seem to be pretty good. Also, Eonon, who make this unit, Eonon sell a range of lower cost head units, which are actually not bad. Mostly they use the rock chip processors. The FYT units sold by the likes of Mercadi, Navifly and so forth, the processor to look out for there is the Unisoc 7862. That's a 8-core Chinese designed and manufactured processor. And if you're going to actually run apps on the head unit as opposed to just use it for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, then I'd suggest going for one with at least 6 gigabytes of RAM and probably 64 gigabytes of memory. The more the better. Okay, so that will enable you to actually run apps on the head unit itself rather than them running them on the phone and the head unit just acting as a dumb terminal. So the 7862, the Unisoc 7862 is a good, powerful processor. It's recently been superseded by the 7870, which is the latest processor, came out in 2024. That's more powerful, it's faster. And for example, that's used in the Aygo Auto 7, which is a nice head unit. I think that's a fairly mature head unit. It seems to have good call quality and the software is pretty well sorted. Okay, so they're the kind of options that you've got. But if you do embark on installing one of these Android head units, expect to spend a bit of time messing around with the software, doing some updates, and so forth. Now on all of them we can connect reversing cameras, so there's plenty of options for connections on the back there. We can connect a reversing camera. They come with the basic FM radio, but not DAB. If you want DAB, you need to buy a little DAB tuner stick, which will plug into one of the USB connectors, which you'll have on a pigtail at the back of the unit, and that will enable you to receive DAB. You'll need a decent antenna. Most Aygo Mark II have a DAB antenna built in. Certainly in the UK, if you purchase one with one of the touchscreen head units from the factory, it will likely have DAB. And obviously you'll need to install some software, an app on the head unit, something like DAB Dream, DAB Z, which will enable you to receive DAB stations. There are also upgraded FM radio apps. Often the FM radios are a bit basic, they don't make use of RDS information, so there are upgrade apps like Navi Radio and so forth. You might have to spend a few pounds on apps, and most of them you'll be able to link your phone to using wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. Okay, so that with Bluetooth activated on your phone, when you get in the car, it will connect to the head unit when you turn the ignition on, and you'll see your phone displayed on the screen. If you want to actually use the processing power of the head unit, that's difficult to do without a Wi-Fi connection. So you're going to have to either use a hotspot from your phone to the head unit, or you can put a 4G SIM card, attach a 4G SIM card to the head unit. So most of these will come with a little flying lead with a little module where you can pop a SIM card in. The problem with that, of course, is that you then need a data plan for the head unit. So that's cost. So you might choose simply to have a hotspot off your phone onto the head unit and let it get its data that way. I must say, having used lots of head units, most of what I want to do I can do with Android Auto. I have an Android phone, and most of the time Android Auto gives me Google Maps. It will give me music, Spotify, tune-in radio or whatever, and I can, if I want, I can use the standard DAB or FM radio if I don't want to listen to music via the internet. So there's some of the options that you've got, and what I'm going to talk about next is how we connect these units up to the existing Toyota wiring. So having taken the original equipment head unit out, how do we connect one of these to the Toyota wiring? So that will be covered in the next part of the video. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll look at the possibilities for wiring adapters to connect your new head unit to the Toyota wiring. The golden rule is don't cut any of the original Toyota connectors off their cables. Keep everything on the car standard, and just use wiring adapters. If you start chopping cables off, things start to get very difficult, and in particular it becomes very hard to put the old head unit back again. For example, when you sell your car, you might want to put the old head unit back. And if you want to change head units in the future, there might be confusion about what wire performs what function, and then you get into a mess with it. So leave the original Toyota connectors as they are. Now, I'm assuming that you sort of have a basic knowledge of electronics, and you know the difference, for example, between volts and amps, and positive and negative. If you really have no or very little knowledge of electrical systems, then it might be better to leave the job to somebody else. If you really don't know what you're doing, best case is you might blow a fuse or two. Worst case, you might actually cause some damage to the car wiring, which obviously could get very expensive. So think about your own level of competence and whether you want to tackle the job. But if you're careful, and in particular if you check against the wiring diagrams I'm including in the video, then it should go well if you're familiar with basic electrics. Anyway, let's look at some of the wiring options that we have. So the thing then is to use wiring adapters, and we've got basically two options when it comes to wiring adapters. So I've got a head unit here. It's an Eonon UA13, and it's got an ISO standard 16-pin connector on the back of it. As for the main radio connections, the power, the front speaker output, illumination control, reverse camera control. It also has a bunch of other proprietary connectors here, which are things like the GPS antenna, microphone input, connections out if you want to use an external amplifier with the radio, and so forth. And the manufacturer will supply you with wiring pigtails for these accessory connectors. Now they'll also most likely, for the main power connector, give you one of these, which is basically a 16-pin ISO connector to a standard ISO connector block. So you have the option of connecting this 16-pin harness up to the radio, and then using another harness which you need to purchase yourself between the Toyota wiring loom and the ISO connector block here. So you've actually got two adapters, one from the head unit to an ISO block, and one from an ISO block to the Toyota wiring loom. The other option is to go directly from the radio to the Toyota wiring loom. So we can buy connectors like these, little harness adapters like these. So this has got the 16-pin connector on one end for the head unit, and it's got the standard Toyota connectors at the other end. So let's first of all look at in a little bit more detail at the option of using the pigtail supplied by the head unit manufacturer, which goes from the 16-pin head unit connector to an ISO block here. So that plugs into the back of the radio. And that leaves us with this ISO block, and then we have the connector harness, which we need to buy ourselves. Now there's a company called Aygo II which supplies these for the Aygo II. They're quite expensive, so shop around to get a reasonable price. I think I paid about £30 for this one, which was a trade price. You might have to pay a little bit more. But what it does is it connects from the ISO block here to the Toyota wiring harness in the vehicle, and it's got, as you can see, it's got various other wires coming off it, and I'll explain what they do. So here's our Aygo II wiring harness. It's got an ISO block here, and it's got three wires coming off it here. There's a pink one, a purple one, and a green one. The purple one is actually the backup signal, the reversing signal. And that comes off pin 2 on this 28-pin connector that connects to the Toyota harness. So the reversing wire needs to connect to whichever wire going into the head unit here is for the reversing function. On this particular harness it says back. Sometimes it will say backup camera or reversing, but you need to connect this to the purple wire. So what happens is when you put the vehicle into reverse gear, it will supply 12 volts into the head unit and cause the head unit screen to switch to the reversing camera. Now if you don't intend using a reversing camera, then you don't actually need to connect that. Also, if your car hasn't got a reversing signal on pin 2 of the 28-pin connector, and some base model vehicles with the factory fitted basic head unit may not have that signal on pin 2, then what you'll have to do is actually run a wire from the reversing camera at the back of the car to this backup signal wire here on the head unit. You might have to take that off the reversing light unit at the back of the vehicle, tap into the reversing light signal and use that to power the camera and supply this switching signal to the head unit. The other thing you'll find on here is you'll find an antenna signal. This is the blue wire here, and basically when you switch the head unit on, that goes to plus 12 volts to power the antenna amplifier on the vehicle. So in addition to this, you will need an antenna connector for the Toyota antenna. So the white connector here is 2-pin connector that will plug into the existing Toyota antenna connection. The coaxial antenna connector here will go into the head unit, and the blue wire for the antenna amplifier power will connect to the blue wire coming out of the head unit. So we need to connect those together. And you'll probably find 2 other wires as well on your head unit, and they'll be labelled something like SWC1, SWC2, or Key 1 or Key 2. These are for the steering wheel controls. So if your car's got steering wheel controls, it's usually got a control on the left side and the right side of the steering wheel, pad 1 and pad 2. And Connects 2 will supply a little unit which provides you with those steering wheel signals. So you've got here a couple of wires. This is on the Connects 2 wiring adapter, label Key 1 and Key 2, and you'll connect those to Key 1 and Key 2 on the head unit. Okay, and there may also be a ground wire, and you need to connect that to a good ground. So that's basically how you go from the Toyota wiring harness using this Connects 2 adapter and the ISO to head unit adapter that comes with the head unit that you purchase. Something else that you'll need is you'll find that on the dashboard of the car there is a USB connector. If you want to keep that USB connector active, you'd need what we call a USB retention lead. And this comes as part of the harness pack. Now, it's not actually to the Toyota standard. It's actually a Peugeot Citroen standard adapter, which strangely enough is also the same as a Hyundai Kia adapter. So you can buy one that's suitable for Hyundai or Kia or Peugeot or Citroen. Be careful how much you pay. Some of these can be astonishingly expensive from UK suppliers. You'd probably be able to get one from AliExpress much cheaper. So the standard USB end there will plug into one of the USB connectors that goes into the back of your head unit, and this custom proprietary end here will plug into the existing lead behind the dashboard that leads down to USB connector, which usually is just below the heater controls in the car. So you need that USB retention lead. So they're the main connectors that we need to wire one of these up using this Connects 2 adapter. Now the other option we have is not to use the head unit to ISO adapter at all, but to go straight from the Toyota wiring harness into the head unit with just a single adapter. Now you can buy these on AliExpress very cheaply. I think I paid about £5 or £6 for this. Obviously take a few weeks to arrive, but it's a cheaper and simpler way to go. And you'll find that they're generally made to fit a range of Toyotas. So you'll find they're kind of sold as a universal adapter, and they're suitable for the Aygo, the Corolla, the Camry, and so forth. So what we have is the standard 16-pin ISO connector, which will go into the head unit there. And then we have a range of other connectors, some of which we don't need. Let's just lift it away from the head unit. So we've got the antenna adapter pre-wired together with the coaxial antenna plug. We've got the 10-pin power and front speaker connector. And we've got a 20-pin and a 28-pin adapter. Now on the Aygo, the 20-pin adapter is not used, so we just park that out of the way. And that leaves us with the 28-pin. Now again, this is probably going to be incorrectly wired for the Aygo, so what you're going to have to do is, there's 3 wires there which are for the steering wheel control. You're going to have to remove those with the de-pinning tool, and you're going to have to move them to the correct pin connections as per the wiring diagram I'll give you. The other thing you'll notice is this has no connection to pin number 2 on the connector, which is the pin for the reversing signal for the head unit. So what you'll need to do is, maybe if you remove the 10-pin connector, sorry, the 20-pin connector that you're not using, you can actually take one of these wires, the pin and a wire out, and you can put that into the 28-pin connector and use it for the reversing signal, which is what I do. Okay, so basically I snip off the wires for this unused 20-pin connector, and I remove one of the pins out of there and pop it into the 28-pin connector at the pin 2 position, and that's my reversing signal. You'll also find there is an 6-pin connector here, and that's actually for the rear speakers. So on the Aygo, obviously there's no rear speakers fitted as standard, so we're not going to use that. But if you were to install speakers in the rear of the car, what you could do is basically snip through those wires there, and you use the top 2 there, purple colour for the rear left, and the green and black there on the right hand side are for the rear right. Okay, so you've got your rear speaker connections there if you want to use them. If you don't want to use them, just leave that connector behind the dash. So doing this, we've got a straightforward connection between the Toyota wiring loom and the head unit. There is a wire label back here. This is the reversing camera coming off this 16-pin connector, so that would need to go to pin 2 and the 28-pin connector that I talked about. If your car has no reversing signal coming in on pin 2, which is possible if it's a base model, then this backup wire will need to be taken down to the back of the car, and you'll need to use the reversing light signal to both power up the camera and switch the head unit into reverse mode. Okay, but whatever you do, follow the wiring diagrams that I give in the video, which explain the pin connections. And when you're looking at those wiring diagrams, be sure to check that you're actually looking at the connector the right way. In other words, that you're looking into the connector and not from behind the connector. In other words, check that the orientation is correct. To give you an idea, the reversing signal is, if you look at this one, the reversing signal is on pin 2. It's the brown wire in this case. So if we look into the connector with the 28 pin connector with these flutes at the top there, Then the top right is pin number 1. It runs across on the top to pin number 14 at the left hand side, and then it starts at the bottom right with pin 15, and you count across to pin 28 at the bottom left. And you can see I've got my 3 steering wheel control connectors there, pins 19, 20 and 21. Okay, they will generally be in the wrong place when you buy one of these adapters, so you make sure you move them. One further thing it's worth mentioning about these head units is that you'll find very few of the Chinese head units have DAB, digital audio broadcasting, incorporated. The big brand names like Kenwood, Pioneer may have it, but certainly these Chinese units invariably don't. So if you want to install DAB, you'll need to put an app on the head unit. There's apps like DAB-Z, which you can download and install. And then you'll actually need a DAB receiver. And normally what you'll get is one of these USB stick type receivers. So when you connect your USB connectors into the back of the head unit, you'll plug this into a spare USB lead. So this is the DAB receiver, and it will need a DAB antenna input. Now the suppliers usually give you a sort of windscreen, stick on the windscreen type antenna, but they're not particularly good. And it's very likely that your Aygo or your C1 or your Peugeot 108 has actually got a DAB antenna already built into it if the original head unit had DAB. So what we can get is we can get an adapter to go from the Toyota DAB antenna connector to a standard threaded SMA connector, which will connect up to the USB DAB receiver. Okay, so that screws onto there like that. Okay, and this will plug on to the connector which is already in the car. Okay, these adapters are a little bit difficult to get hold of. There's a variety of these high frequency connectors on the market. So if you look on eBay, you'll see a variety of connectors which look quite similar to this, but they're not actually the same. So for example, there's the Hi-Rose GT5. There's also something called the HFC3 connector. They look similar, but they're not actually the same, and they won't fit. This is what's known as an HFC2 connector, and it was used on just a few Toyota and Lexus models, so this is quite difficult to get hold of. And as far as I know, there's only 2 companies supplying it. There's a company somewhere in the US, and there's also a company called Car Solutions, who I think are based in Hong Kong. It's where I ordered it from, and I think it was about £12 delivered. They're actually, strangely enough, made in Ukraine by Gurmese Lab, which is an automotive cable supplier, but Car Solutions sell them, and it takes about a week or so to get one to the UK. So if you do want DAB, then get yourself one of these little adapters. There's a variety of these on the market. They basically all seem to be the same. They all seem to use the same DAB chip inside, and get yourself one of these adapter leads. If you have a different kind of DAB receiver that doesn't use a threaded SMA connector, then you will have to use an adapter. So for example, if it was an SMB push-on, you'd need an SMA to SMB adapter to push it on. But don't cut the cables and try and terminate them yourself unless you really know what you're doing, because at DAB frequencies it doesn't take much to lose the signal. A frequent query if you install an aftermarket head unit is whether you can use the car's existing internal microphone. So if the car came with one of the touchscreen head units, the original touchscreen head units, it had a microphone up by the interior light unit. So this is the interior light unit. This is actually out of a C1. If you've got a 108 or an Aygo Mark II, it might look slightly different, but it's going to be essentially the same. So this clips into the head lining just in front of the rear view mirror. It's actually retained by 4 little plastic tabs into this white frame, which is part of the head lining. So if you decide to take it out to take a look, don't just pull it down because you'll damage the head lining. You need a slim trim tool and release these 4 quite strong clips, one at more or less each corner of the interior light unit. Now the interior light unit has a grille in it and the microphone sits behind that. Okay, so the microphone sits in there behind the grille, and then there's a two terminal connector with a black wire and a white wire. The white wire is the signal and power feed to the microphone. The black wire is ground, and that connects into the car's wiring harness just above the light unit there. Now, the 2 wires, the signal and ground, are actually taken down to the 28-pin connector, which is behind the head unit in the dashboard. And obviously the factory fit radio can use that as its microphone input signal. However, you cannot directly use that with an aftermarket head unit. An aftermarket head unit is designed to work with a small electret condenser microphone, and the head unit puts out about 2 volts just to energize the electret condenser. If we look at the factory fit microphone, what we'll see if I feed the wire through is that we have an electret condenser capsule in there, but we also have a little bit of circuitry. There's actually a little bit of filtering and a little bit of amplification there. And on these vehicles, it requires about 8 volts to energize that. So the 2 volts from the aftermarket head unit isn't enough to power up the factory fit microphone. Now, there would be a way around that. You can make a power injector, so you could put together a little bit of circuitry which fits between the aftermarket head unit and the factory fit microphone and injects a higher voltage. 5 volts is probably going to be enough, maybe 8 volts ideally. And you may also have to attenuate down the signal from this microphone a bit as well. So there's a bit of work involved. Unless you're an electronics engineer, you're probably not going to want to do that. So the short answer is you can't use this microphone directly with an aftermarket head unit, not without some additional circuitry. So when you install your aftermarket head unit, you're going to have to install the included microphone. Usually they come with a condenser microphone.